Houston Rockets are about to shock the world. After being in the rebuild process ever since trading away James Harden a couple years back, the Rockets have done a really nice job at bringing in some nice talented young players. But although they have had some nice players over the past couple seasons, they weren't necessarily able to do all that much in terms of wins. But based upon some of the moves they were able to make this offseason, I do think the Houston Rockets are poised to shock the world. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicySports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. The Houston Rockets over the last couple seasons have been a very interesting team. After being a perennial playoff team for a 5 or 6 year run, the Rockets always found themselves in the mix, but at the end of the day, they were never able to make it over the top and win an NBA championship. And due to that, the Houston Rockets finally decided it was time to trade away their main guys in James Harden and Russell Westbrook and go in the direction of a rebuild. And ever since the Rockets traded away James Harden and Russell Westbrook, they've been one of the worst teams in the NBA, but at the same time, they were in the process of adding young talent to the roster. And when you look at their roster currently going into this next upcoming season, I do feel as if the Rockets have done a pretty nice job at adding talented young players to their team that also have a ton of potential going forward. And at this point, I do feel as if the Rockets have a chance to shock the world this upcoming season. So the first question at this point is what do I mean by this? What do I mean when I say I think the Houston Rockets are going to shock the world? Well, in my opinion, I actually do think there's a real chance that Houston's able to make the playoffs this upcoming season. Of course, I don't think they're going to win a championship or go all that far in the playoffs, but just to make it there would be a huge accomplishment for this otherwise young roster. And going into this next season, I don't necessarily think a lot of people are expecting them to do so. But the next question is, why do I feel this way? Why do I think the Rockets have a real chance to make the playoffs in a tough Western Conference? The first reason I want to touch upon is the overall talent. When you look at Houston's current roster, they actually have a ton of talented players. For example, like Jalen Green, Sengun is really good, Jabari Smith has been nice, Kevin Porter Jr. They also added a couple of nice rookies this offseason. They added Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks during the free agency period, and overall there just are a lot of different players on this roster who I really like currently at this point, alongside with their potential future. Now, one thing that some of you may be saying is, although the Rockets did add some nice players in free agency alongside with the draft, some of the other guys that I mentioned before, like Jalen Green, Sengun, Jabari Smith, Kevin Porter Jr., those are all players that the Rockets have had for a couple seasons at this point, and they weren't able to be successful. But in my opinion, the fact that those guys are getting extra years of NBA experience under their belt, alongside with some other factors that I'll get into later, I do think they will be much better players individually, alongside with the fact that I think they'll have a much better understanding of how to play the NBA game a little bit better. So I do think the overall talent is a significant factor for any team, but of course with this year's Houston Rockets, for why I think there's a real chance they're able to make the playoffs. Now, the next reason that I want to touch upon for why I think the Houston Rockets are going to be able to make the playoffs this upcoming season has to be due to coaching. Now, as I mentioned before, the Houston Rockets actually have had a pretty talented roster for the last couple seasons, but although they were a pretty talented young team, they weren't necessarily able to have all that much success whatsoever. And the main reason, in my opinion, for why that was due to the fact that a lot of their young guys just didn't understand how to play the NBA game. It almost seemed like the Houston Rockets were an AAU team for the past couple years, where it just seemed like their main guys were able to put up good individual numbers, but they didn't understand how to play with their teammates and how to win NBA games out there. And I think a huge reason for why that wasn't only due to the players themselves, but was also due to the lack of coaching, or the lack of good coaching. But when you look at what the Rockets were able to do this previous offseason in signing Ime Udoka, I actually think this is going to go a long way for this Houston Rockets team, as Ime has had a proven track record of being successful with the Boston Celtics, and I do think he would do a really nice job with this pretty young roster in Houston. And if these guys are able to buy into what Ime is selling, especially these younger guys on this roster, I do think they actually have the talent that will be required to make the playoffs in this tough Western Conference. And maybe even they can go a little bit further than that, who knows. But I do think at the end of the day, what what Ime would provide to this young Houston roster is going to be invaluable to these guys. Now, the next reason I want to touch upon for why I think the Rockets have a real chance to make the playoffs this upcoming season is due to Fred VanVleet specifically. VanVleet is a talented younger point guard that not only has a ton of playoff experience, but he also has championship experience. So even besides the overall skill and talent that he would bring on the court for the Rockets, in my opinion, a huge factor for why this signing was so huge is Fred understands how to win a championship because he's done it. So bringing that sort of wisdom and experience to this young roster and teaching these guys what it takes not only to make the playoffs, but also what it takes to win an NBA championship is going to be so valuable to these younger guys. And I think similar to the coaching addition, the addition of Fred VanVleet is huge for this reason specifically. But of course, even besides what he's going to be able to teach to these younger guys, the fact that he's a guy who's capable of putting up 25 plus on any given night, alongside with truly running an NBA offense and getting guys easy looks, is going to be very valuable to this younger team, and it's going to give a lot of different guys more easy looks out there. So I actually was a huge fan of the signing at the time, but also even now even more so. And I think it's also a huge reason for why I think the Rockets have a decent chance to make the playoffs this upcoming season, and maybe even get a little bit further than that. But with all that being said, I do think going into this upcoming season, the Rockets are going to have somewhat of a slower start. Because when you look at all the changes that happened in Houston, it's a ton. They just added a new head coach that these players are going to take some time to get used to. They just added some players in the draft. They also added significant players in free agency, a guy in Dillon Brooks who's going to be a main part of this roster, but also a guy in Fred VanVleet that's going to be their best player, at least early on. So when you have this many changes to a roster from one season to the next, it's going to be difficult for any team to get their chemistry right and get used to those new players and that new coach. But especially when you talk about a team that's as young as the Houston Rockets are, it's definitely going to take some time, at least at the beginning of the season, for everybody to feel comfortable together, for everybody to start playing well together, and I do think they are going to have somewhat of a slow start, but as the year does progress, I do think they're only going to get better and better. And once it comes down to the tail end of the season, I do think the Rockets are going to be playing some of their best basketball of the season, and at that point, as I mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if they're able to make it to the playoffs. So I am extremely excited to see what the Houston Rockets are able to do this upcoming season, but also as they are an extremely young roster, I do think they have a ton of potential going forward as well. I do think a lot of those similar issues that they were facing in the previous couple years, in terms of them just not playing as a team, are going to go away this upcoming year, and I think they're going to be headed in the right direction from this upcoming season on. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening for this Houston Rockets organization. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Houston Rockets have a real chance to make the playoffs this upcoming season, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.